Before we begin, thank you very much to Thanatos Icon for joining the Patreon campaign. Very appreciated. Thank you very much. It's looking crazy on the Patreon again. I'll say that. I will tell you that right now. I've been going nuts, like, watching this roll in. You guys, like, I'm almost close to having another month. And I mean by this, I have enough shoutouts now to get me close to the end of the month, which would be 5 months in a row straight. You've almost made it half a year of shoutouts every day without being able to just do a normal intro. And I thank you very much for that level of insanity. I do appreciate it. So, speaking of my Patreon campaign and all the things that I've been doing for it lately, I've been trying to catch up on all the video requests. It's mostly stuff that I can do here with research and source material rather than toy reviews. Those will come later once I have full access to my toys. So right now, they're a little bit hard to get to. However, I do have a nice one today, which is I've done G1 toys who need new characters, G1 characters who need new toys a couple of times now, and generally my predictions seem to be spot on, but that's mostly because I am just looking at the tea leaves and seeing, like, whose turn is it? Who hasn't been done in a while? Who would probably be good on a toy shelf right about now? You know, and famously, the first time I did this, I was right. All 10 got toys within, like, a year and a half. So now, we're going to do something different. This isn't going to be a here's 10 list, but someone requested me to look at the Japanese G1 cast of on-screen characters and tell you who really hasn't had a toy in a long time. Because keep in mind, if you're a G1 fan in America, you're feasting well. I mean, a lot of us are getting sick of seeing G1 have so much prominence. But, you know, that's what sells, you know, and there's still areas that G1 hasn't covered. But if you're in Japan, there are sections of cartoons that have basically just been overlooked for years now. You know, I mean, as it is, I don't think Japanese exclusive G1 characters would be such a thing if they didn't run that poll once upon a time to determine what what leader for the Autobots was going to get a masterpiece next, which Star Saber won. I think that played a big influence on us starting to get G1 from Japan. Here in America, it's almost been a taboo. You know, I mean, if we get a Japanese G1 character, it's because they did a toy of one character. It has to be repainted into this character because it's the only option. Thunderwing was a good example of that. So let's take a look. So let's just go, if you're a Japanese fan, if you grew up with Headmasters, you're actually doing pretty good. Most of the Headmasters cast has been covered. Really, there's only one exception in my mind that came through, and we're not going to talk about it till the end because it's kind of a weird one to bring up right now, especially for me to bring up, but we'll get to it in a bit. But for the most part, if you grew up with Headmasters in Japan, you're doing pretty well. The same cannot be said for Master Force. Now, this is largely because it depended on things like Pretenders and Power Masters that weren't necessarily as popular in America, so Hasbro has no real reason to do them other than we're running out of other G1 characters to do. We need something to fill in the line. But that means if you are a Japanese fan, you're kind of left in the dark, you know, and a lot of these characters who may be your favorites, the ones you are nostalgic for, have been completely overlooked and may never, at this rate, get a toy or two. So, I mean, just take a look at this. So let's start, like, Headmaster Juniors are the obvious place to go. So we have Minerva. Minerva has a modern toy, and that's largely because they needed things to remold Elita 1 from. There's more than one Headmaster Junior, obviously. The only toys they have gotten were with the God Bomber figure that came out in, like, the multi-pack with Super Jinrai, having those 3 Headmaster units, which doesn't really cut it, does it? You know, you really want to have, like, the full Headmaster experience. So we are still missing a Go Shooter, which was Siren in America, and we're still missing a Cab, which was Hosehead here in America. Kind of weird. Keep in mind, if this was a Hasbro-driven thing, they'd complete the set because they're really big about completing sets of characters now. So it's kind of odd that even Ghost Shooter, who's like more prominent since he was like the lead like kid character of the show, we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it, which is it's kind of weird. Kind of weird. And you think like just normal cop car, we could do a lot of retooling out of that. No, haven't seen it yet. Oh, let's not forget, there's Headmaster Juniors on the Decepticon side of things too. And once again, we are 1 for 3. So we have Fangry, who was a Headmaster Junior in Japan. Fangry has a modern figure. But the other two, which we got as, who are they? Squeeze Play and, oh man, I knew I would forget this. I knew I'd forget this because I will admit I'm not up nearly as much on my my Japanese side of the fiction in this area. But no, Bullhorn. Bullhorn, who was horrible over here, and Cancer, which was Squeeze Play here. Yeah. Now, granted, I have no idea what you'd do with those figures. If you had to remold them, I have no idea what you would do. I thought like Squeeze Play and Repugnus would have made remolds of each other, but they didn't go that route. It's a weird choice. This is like where it's not even about popularity, you know, because some of these characters had some prominence in the original cartoons in Japan. However, it's more about the fact that they can't really use them for anything else. And we know that is such a huge priority for Hasbro and Takara to actually be able to get more than one use out of a mold. So when you look at something like Squeeze Play, it might just be a little bit too unique. Might be a little bit too out of their range. But hopefully they get that. Now, the other side of Master Force, I said, is the Pretenders, where you've got a nightmare going on. You have a lot of Pretenders being represented in Hasbro's toy line these days. Unfortunately, it's all on the Decepticon side, because I think when we start thinking Headmaster, or Pretenders rather, making a lot of mistakes today, I apologize. When we talk about Pretenders, I think most of the time we think about the Decepticon ones that stand out so much from each other, and not the Autobot ones, which were basically just the kind of similar looking Space Marines with different colors. You know, they're a little bit dull compared to the Pretender Decepticons. So, thusly, when we get to the Master Force characters, that means a lot of them do not get anything. We got Metal Hawk. So there we go. We got some Japanese G1 there. That's good. But Diver, Lander, Phoenix, who are the other, main Autobot Pretenders in America, no, we don't get those at all. And I don't even expect to get them. You know, they just seem kind of dull compared to the other ones. I don't think they're nearly as memorable. And honestly, Metal Hawk, I think, only stands out because his inner robot's so flashy, and it was the one Pretender that America never got. So it kind of stands out. There's a prominence to it that makes it a little bit special, even if it never came to America before. Something collectors bite into, you know? So that's an unfortunate side. There's some obvious things that never happened. So this is Buster and Hydra combined as Darkwings. And of course, we know them as, can I get this right? Darkwing and Dreadwind. Now, we've gotten modern toys of them. They were in Power of the Primes. I can see them from my sitting vantage point right now in my shelf. Now, granted, they are already remolds. They are heavy remolds of the Aerialbot figures because they did that a lot. But to the point, these do have distinct colors. Now, admittedly, not very distinct. That's going to be one of the reasons why this is probably not done. So, things like this. There's a weird pattern in Japanese G1 figures around this era where they didn't want to release them to look exactly like the American counterparts. So, like where we have, I believe these are, it's supposed to be blue or gray? I can't remember. It's been a long time since I looked at Dreadwind. But point being, they changed one color. Like this red is not on the American version, but that's really the only difference. So, even as a Generation Selects, that might be a stretch. And a lot of times it kind of leads to Hasbro and Takara just kind of releasing a figure and going, yeah, that's him. They did that with Double Dealer, who was Double Clouder in Japan, and had a few unique colors to him, but only detail stuff. You know, nothing very specific. Largely, they look similar to each other, so they just released it one or the other, which is unfortunate because it kind of erases the uniqueness of the Japanese version of the character, who's far more, you know, well, I wouldn't say far more nuanced, but like he actually showed up in a show, so he has a lot more character presented than Double Dealer does. More to the point, there's just a lot of these characters that aren't going to make it just because they're a little off like that. This is another nice example. This is Ranger, one of the other Godmasters. And this one was Joyride here in America. And again, just one color difference. Just one color difference separating him from the original. So like where a Ranger uses white as his primary color, Joyride uses dark blue. Otherwise, they're pretty similar looking to each other. It's weird. So things like this are very touch and go. I mean, it's characters that you could do them as Gen Selects if they're different enough, but again, you're lacking that prominence that Hasbro wants. This is the kind of character that you would expect to see remolded from someone else. So it gets hard. It gets really hard to like figure out how they would even work. Just figure out how to work. There's these guys too. Yeah, these are Spark Dash. This is a subgroup called Spark Dash, which see, what was it over here? Sparkabots and Firecons over here. What would they do? What else would they possibly do with these kaiju-looking boys? I think if you had like a deluxe Grimlock that you could retool these guys to just for a joke, I think that would be cool. It'd be a funny thing to do with the core class Grimlock just as a gag. But otherwise, like, what do you do with them? What do you do with them? They're on show they're on screen characters, but do you ever expect to get another toy of them? No. So they're kind of low on the list, admittedly. But like that's like just like a small smattering of stuff from Master Force. I didn't go into even individual characters amongst all of these different groups and classifications. I didn't bring up every, because there's like there's a bunch of Godmasters too, which again I think we've only gotten one. Because Lightfoot over in Japan was Getaway over here, who does technically have a modern figure. So it's weird. it's weird. But yeah, there's a lot to leave behind in Master Force. But that leaves us to Victory, where guess what? Yeah, I've talked about this a million times. Of course I have. Lyokaiser is still the obvious one, right? We've talked about Lyokaiser needing a new toy for a long time now, not even just because it's one of the coolest combiners in G1, but also just because there's actual personality to some of his individual components. Leozak and Hellbat are characters that stand out a lot as members of their combiner team. So it's kind of like a Swindle situation where, he's definitely he stands out enough to be his own character, and yet he still doesn't even have an individual toy. I would love to see this. Absolutely love to see this. And we're kind of at a point where the tech that we go into toys can actually support something like this. So hopefully down the line, it seems like with Victory Saber out, with Death Sars on the way, it seems like a pretty glaring omission, right? But that doesn't mean it's the only one. We could talk the Rhodes Caesar boys too. Now again, I don't think Brain Masters are going to be a thing as a gimmick in a toy line ever again. But here's another design where like I would really champion a new version of this because the original one is so goofy. So if you've never seen it, the 3 Autobots who make up this combiner are all the same size. But one of them has to be the torso while the other 2 just need to fill out the legs. So the proportions are ridiculous. If you've ever seen a Predaking with just the 2 legs without its arms, or like just using imagine like if Predaking was just, without his normal arms, it was just using Razor Claw's little arms. That's kind of how he looks. I'd love for them to take another shot at it with modern design, engineering, modern ideas. I mean, it's a cool idea. I mean, 3-piece combiners are super rare, so I wouldn't mind them trying it again. If only just because, like, they're actually pretty prominent in Victory and don't get any respect nowadays in the toy line. We can also talk about these boys. So I had some of these. What were they? They released these as this is the Multi-Force or Land Cross, if you want his combiner name. The Multi-Force is a super cool set of figures. They reissued them as DX Micromasters, and I had them for a long time, and they're actually really fun. So they basically had the Energon Autobot gimmick long before Energon, and in weird ways, it kind of worked better than it did on those because, like they actually had like unique heads for the super modes and everything. It was fun. They were like, they're very primitive, of course, but they're fun toys. And like, if you wanted to do modern Energon Deluxes with that gimmick, this is your obvious retooling from those at some point. Just the idea, like, you'd have to come up with how to remold someone into a boat for one. But for the most part, yeah, like I could absolutely, if they actually had the guts. Hasbro has said if they're going to do deluxe Energon figures again in modern toys, they'd want to try and get the Power Link gimmick in there. And if they did, this is a way of reusing those figures pretty well. So that's my hope. That's my hope if we get Landcross again. And that would take us into like, those more obscures like Zone. The request was specifically for on-screen characters. So we're kind of running low on those. Like, this is why I didn't do it as a Here's 10, because I think there's just enough to cover a whole video. If I did just a Here's 10, it would still kind of reference all of them, just because there's just not enough to go around. Admittedly, there's been some pretty good strides in actually getting a lot of these characters out there. We could talk about this, Diatlas, Galaxy Shuttle here, they have modern figures. The quality is questionable, but they do exist. What I would love to see is like some of these, Decepticons, like some of these, like the Great Generals or whatever they were called in Zone with like all the weird armor and retooling. I would love, like, if we just did, like, we need like a Voyager or Leader class Scorponok, so we could do some like ridiculous retooling of something like this. That's where you get your double punch retools and repaints. That's where you get the Zone version of Black Zarak. That's the kind of craziness I would love to have if we're talking this. And now let's go back. Let's wheel all the way back to Headmasters, because there is one that we do have to talk about. And the one that I do think really needs a new toy above all others. And this is going to seem really weird. But where's Ryden? Because let's face it, the Masterpiece one is not cutting it. It's very clunky. The proportions are super weird. There's been a lot of breakage issues I've seen with it. And then, of course, the cost. This thing's like over $1,000 after shipping. So you're in it for an enormous amount of money for something that is ultimately not all that great. You're never going to get it to release in America because America just doesn't have the interest in trains that Japan does. However, it is a very prominent combiner in Headmasters, so it definitely deserves another go-around at an affordable price point. Not this ridiculous Masterpiece stuff. Unfortunately, because of the Masterpiece, I really think the demand is going to be sated for a while, even if there is some backlash. Honestly, I don't know how the reaction to these guys in Japan is. All I know is from forum posts I've seen and the ones that are released already, the American fans are not happy with their investment so far. So, but that might be a situational thing. More to the point, yeah, I would love to see ones that are comparable to the combiners we had from Combiner Wars. That size, that engineering level, not something that's unapproachable, either through price or complexity. And that's pretty much it. Like, that winds me all the way back to the beginning of the list. Like I said, like, there's a lot of Japanese G1 characters from the cartoons that don't have toys, but it seems like stuff that is either... It's weird. It's weird. It's either sets where I feel like they've got to do this eventually because it's too easy of a figure to do, and then the opposite side of the spectrum is, this is literally impossible. I literally cannot imagine Hasbro ever making these again. But that's the list. That's basically your rundown of who is still missing out of your Japanese G1 cast. So, hope you're educated. Who on the list, who is still missing from, you know, your Headmasters, your Master Force, your Victory, your Zone, that you would still like to see made into a new toy? Because that's kind of interesting, because they're all super deep cuts at this point. So it's different for everybody. And that's kind of what's interesting about it. But for now, thank you guys for watching. I will see you next time.
I'm like, I think you guys got this. I will back away, and I will see you all later.
You've got this handled.
Alafi's like, really? You're not gonna help me? Like, it's fine now.
It's like these disgusting creatures breathing down my neck, and you're all just like, I believe in you. You got this. That
All right,
burn.
you seem to have this. 5 minutes.